I really love that, actually. That it has a great feel to it. It is all about the feel. As I'm reading through the books of Christopher Valentine and Christian von Lauer, it's a sense that there are little people all around us. The question is, when and how do we get to speak to them? How can they affect our lives? We'll find out next, coming up on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. So it's two authors here, and we're just checking on the phones because one of them, as we were just hearing before we went to the break, it sounded a little bit like we were getting what we call some slapback there on the phone. So we wanted to make sure that we have a good connection with both of our guests. Let's give it a try. Let's try Dr. Christian von Lauer first. Christian?
Yes, how are you, Ian?
Good. Can I sound okay to you?
You certainly do.
All right, good. Then we'll line up your partner and co-author here on these books, Christopher Valentine, in just a moment, and we should be able to get a good phone connection with him too. But let's start with the books. Do we have Christian yet? I mean, Christopher? Okay, let's bring up Christopher too then. Christopher, are we sounding all right?
Yeah, you sound great, Ian.
That's much better than what we did before the break, so thank you. All right, so if you could only see a gnome's story, seeing and sensing gnomes, the magic of gnomes and leprechauns, it's natural, magical powers and mystical beings. These are the titles of your books, and you can go to coasttocoastam.com and link up from there. But Christian or Christopher, and I'll try to keep you guys sorted out as we go through the interview. It's not enough that we have two male voices, but we also have the same names. So
we'll be able to help you out there, Ian.
Okay, good. But let's sort out for me, if you would, just as a matter of vocabulary, the difference between gnomes and fairies and elves and leprechauns, and how do they relate to each other in this natural world?
Okay. By the way, we'll probably come back and indicate how they sort of came about. But gnomes are an earth-related nature person. We call them nature people because they do have a degree of individualization. So they will come across with a personality. They have characteristics that look very human-like, except that they're somewhat shorter or smaller than most people. In other words, they have faces with eyes and ears, feet and arms. Elves are also earth-related, but they will tend to be thinner, and they tend to be gravitating towards areas where the forest and mountains meet the water. So there's a strong water connection with elves, too, even though they're of the earth element. And again, we're just being brief here to start with, but fairies relate with the air. They're a much smaller type of nature person. They happen to be extremely bright and very easy to see once someone gets over a few stumbling blocks, but they have a very bright inner glow, and usually see them in larger groups, like groups of 10, and they like certain colors, so they're going to be drawn to certain types of plants. And there's also leprechauns, which can be a little bit more magical, and they work in different realms than the other nature spirits. There's also salamanders we'll talk about today, which are nature people of the flame or fire. And there's also several that pertain to water, such as undines or sprite. It's interesting, though, that all nature people do take a humanesque appearance, but all things in the universe are actually trying to take this common form. That's sort of why in Christianity they say, in my image. It's a theosophical or philosophical maxim that everything tries to take a form that starts out human-like. So don't be surprised when you first see nature people that they look like little people.
And when you say nature people, and I know there's lots to get to, so we'll unpack this as we go along. So
sure.
Thank you for being patient with these sort of preliminary questions. When we say nature people, we're saying that these are naturally occurring, not magical beings.
That's actually a great place to start this, because most people have that misconception, and they sort of want to believe in them as if they're something fantastical. They are a normal part of life just as we are. They are on a parallel developmental path, and they're akin to angels. So they come just below angels on a parallel form of life. And above them would be devas, above that would be archangels. But that whole angelic kingdom, which we call the Deva kingdom, is where nature spirits of all type belong, those that are individualized and others. and they serve a function in this universe. And they were here before us or any other type of life. And that function is to be builders of the universe, and then more lately, maintenance people of the universe.
So when we say they're here with us, and I, it's only because I haven't, to my knowledge, seen a gnome, an elf, a fairy, a leprechaun, etc. I haven't seen them, but have I seen them without knowing what I was seeing?
Most definitely, you have.
Okay.
You're really touching on some incredible questions, and I hope we can really explore those fully. Now, nature people live a very, very long time because they are made up of an etheric energy, which is just a little bit lighter than air, but that still places them here on the physical plane, which means we all have the ability to see them with a few techniques. But because they live a long time, we have known them in past lives, many past lives. The reason this is important is because nature people are very happy to see us, and they will go out of their way to spread their joy and to be playful and to let you know that they're around us. This occurs most often with children when they're very young and they haven't learned through peer pressure or parents that they shouldn't have invisible friends, for example. And a lot of children experience nature people. I read them a lot of exhibitions. And it's not difficult to see them, by the way. It's just that your subconscious mind, which tries to control you and make you like everyone else, says that you shouldn't see them. So the breakthrough is we just need to get past the subconscious mind, do a trick with the eyes, and most people will be able to see them.
Okay, now this is a process question. Mm-hmm. I have been talking with Dr. Christian von Lauer, correct?
You have.
Okay, and is Christopher a nature person, or will he ever appear in the course of the interview?
I am here, and a lot of people think that when I'm describing gnomes, it's so funny at the expos that we speak at, I'm describing what gnomes look like, and they say, you know what, you're describing yourself. You look exactly like the gnomes. So,
do you?
Oh, yeah, and I do. Some people, though, come up to me and they say, you know, you're a leprechaun, and some people say you are fairy energy, and then other people say you kind of look like an elf. So I get a lot of all different types. But
when they come up and they say you're a fairy, is that are them's fighting words? I mean, do you roll up your sleeves at that point?
It was on the last radio station interview we did.
Okay, well, and I've seen your pictures of the book sleeves, and that's why when you say that people think you look like an elf, that tells me then a little bit more what elves look like. If I can see your picture, Christopher, then do you have a traditionally elfin appearance?
I probably have a little bit more than Christian, because elves tend to be the most slender of all the nature people, and they're very tall.
Oh, listen to this.
Yeah. So I think Christian, he was calling you fat there. I don't know. I could be. Yeah, exactly. I thought I picked up on that. I don't know.
You touched on a really interesting point, though, there, Ian. It's not that fantastical either to be associated with nature people, because this world goes through various evolutionary cycles, and everything has to go through all of these stages. So a very, very long time ago, we would have gone through a stage of either being a gnome or an elf or a fairy or a brownie, even a rock and a plant and an animal.
Wait, stop. You threw brownies into this. Now, hold on a second. I didn't even know we were talking about brownies. What's a brownie now? What's different from about a brownie as opposed to an elf or a leprechaun?
Well, a brownie is another earth nature spirit, and they're kind of close to the gnomes. So they're about the same size, which is about 16 inches or about 1.5 feet, and they are not quite as civilized as the gnomes. We don't talk about them too much in our books, but they do come around in big groups, so we have seen them before, and you can kind of attract them to your home and your gardens by putting out different types of foods, but we don't really channel them too much or associate too much with them. They're kind of, though, very much similar to the gnomes.
Okay, wait. When you say civilized, does that mean they're going to steal your hubcaps, or that they're... what does civilized mean?
Very close, Ian. Okay. The gnomes tend to try and mimic our lifestyle. They try to have jobs, and they try to fit in and do the same kind of things we do. They really sort of play along with what we're doing. The brownies tend to stay together in a group in the forest, in which case they don't tend to participate in society as much. And
Okay.
they do have a color difference, too, which is why we call them brownies.
Okay, back up. Where are the gnomes working? You said they have jobs. Where do gnomes work?
Yeah, we're all over the place right at the beginning here.
No, I love it. I'm just doing,
great.
but I'm going to
Sure.
I'll be hanging on to this.
Yeah,
for,
but Chris and I are both anxious to speak, so let's see. Let's give him a chance on that one.
Christopher, all right, go ahead, Christopher. Where do the gnomes work?
Well, the gnomes are primarily involved with helping the plants grow through bringing minerals to the plants through the roots. So they're very much associated with being close to the ground or underground and living in tree trunks. And as Christian was saying earlier, all nature spirits are builders. So the gnomes are really primarily involved in helping plants grow and building plants. They also, though, and probably one of the most far-out things that you'll hear from us, is that gnomes help us with our health, and they're also present at our birth. And the reason for that is that we have a mesh that attracts the different minerals to our body, which they help bring. And that's one of their purposes.
So I think what Christopher is, he's touching on sort of some scientific points here. Nature people work with energy. That's sort of their function on this earth, and he's indicating that their work with the plants is what brings them color and sense. When the gnomes, for example, work on minerals and dirt and rocks and crystals, they're imbuing them with properties and helping them be what they were intended to be by some grand plan. What he slipped in there, though, was that they also work on the human body, and this is important because we have a type of energy around us called etheric energy. It's spelled with an A-E.
Right.
That etheric energy is actually visible. We can teach people to see that, and that's one of the techniques we use to get people to see nature people right away. But the gnomes work on that etheric energy before you were born to follow this golden mesh that looks like screen door material, and they start bringing substance and minerals to it according to some divine plan for us, and that's how we start taking substantial shape and form. But as we continue to live, we need constant repair, which is also why they're around us all the time.
So that gnomes or fairies or elves or brownies, they could serve a medicinal purpose in our life.
Yes, and that's what I was just going to get to. Gnomes and leprechauns especially so much want to become part of our family. And as you were touching on earlier, gnomes like to have jobs. And it's really funny because we're always getting gnomes, and they usually come in pairs. And it's always when we have some new project that we're doing. Say, for instance, when we were getting our first books that were coming in, being shipped in, we had 2 gnomes that joined our family about a week or 2 before the books came, and they said they were in charge of drayage and getting things in order. And it was funny because we had already known these gnomes because every time we went to Walmart, we would see them in the parking.
Okay, stop. What parking lot, a Walmart parking lot, has gnomes hanging in it?
This is in, let's see, West Jefferson, North Carolina. But it's very important for the listeners to know that you do not have to go to a specific place to see nature people, because people are always asking us, where can we go to find the fairies and the gnomes? Then they are everywhere. You don't have to go to a particular state or a particular place. But of course, it's always good to start in nature. But gnomes and leprechauns and even fairies will also come into your home.
Okay, so is it possible that you walk into, say, a Starbucks, you're ordering a skim latte, and there's a gnome that's working as a barista?
Yes, there is. And you know, it's so funny that you asked this, because the last 4 gnomes that joined our family are called the Starbuck Kids, and they're in the next book that you'll see. And one of them is called Starbucks, and we met him at the last show that we just did in Philadelphia.
Why do you think Starbucks has those colors?
Well, Christian is always needs a Starbucks coffee wherever city we go to. It's a must, and there are gnomes working everywhere. They're in the gas stations, they're in the restaurants, they're in the Starbucks places, and one of the things that you can do is leave pennies for them. But this is another instance where we had some gnomes that just joined our family, and they like to have a job and a purpose, and so.
Let me add some background to that.
Okay, again, I'm going to jump in here for just 1 second and say we have 2 people on the line here. It's Dr. Christian von Lauer and Christopher, and I'm so sorry here. So the book is, I'm in the dark, Christopher, so let me just reach over. I have to hold this up to my computer to be able to see it, and it's Valentine, of course.
Yeah.
So as co-authors of 4 books here on fairies, gnomes, elves, I just want, for people who are tuning in, I wanted them to know that there were 2 different voices. All right, go ahead, Dr. Christian.
We wanted to point out that nature people are by design purposeful beings. So they've always been accustomed to doing something. So that's in their nature. Now, mankind has progressed extremely fast, and the world and the environment that we live in not only has changed, it affects them because we really coexist in the same space. They just see the etheric part, we see the physical part. Every time they wake up nowadays, there's a parking lot or a store built right where their house used to be. Their whole world has changed. They can't just run in the mountains or go through the forest because the world is changing so quickly because of man. Because of that, they've come to the conclusion they need to start interacting with man. It's now time to make their presence known more openly, and let man do what it can do, and they'll help out in the ways that we can't do things. So,
but are they drawing a paycheck? Are they getting?
They
do they have social security numbers?
They do in a strange way. They adore copper, and similarly they adore pennies. So they like copper pennies and silver dimes. So they actually get an allowance. They'll often ask for that. And when you see them in nature, you'll often run across nature people that are asking for a toll, for example. So they believe in trading, though. They don't consider it a paycheck. Everything's in exchange or a trade with them.
Okay, so the person that's working at Starbucks, the gnome that's working at Starbucks, isn't necessarily on the federal tax dole. I mean, it's not. They're not. They're not on the record somewhere.
Well,
they're working off the books.
Don't tell people that.
No, they're not. They're not getting a paycheck from Starbucks, but they like to help out wherever they are. And so, as Christian was saying, maybe that family of gnomes used to live there where that Starbucks was built, and they're just a part of that business now. They like to have dutiful, purposeful lives, just like we do. And that's one of the things that nature people can inspire us, is to have a purpose in our life.
And remember, they're playful, too.
Right.
So there's some fun involved in helping out Starbucks and seeing the joy in people's faces when they deliver that grande latte.
And they love coffee, so that goes perfectly together.
Well, and I love coffee too. When I'm standing at the counter and I'm ordering, however, do the people behind the counter, do they know that other person there that's working is a gnome? I mean, do they know that?
Some do and some don't. By the way, do you find that you're always dropping coins and pennies on the counter or change when you're ordering your coffee?
I always give him my change, but that's just because by the time they give him my change back, it's about 11 cents. So I just throw it in there. Out of my 5, I get 11 cents back.
They really like that, to get those small coins, too. But nature people are there whether we know it or not, but the people that are working there are probably the main reason that those particular gnomes are there, because we all have our own set. And so they sort of follow us around. Even if we move, they follow us around. If the family divides up, they split up. We will always have gnomes around us in particular. And so they will try and do whatever fits into our lives.
There are lots of topics to get to. Obviously, we're hearing a lot of them brought up, and I promise you, when we get to phone calls, especially coming up later on, I'm sure if we haven't gotten to your question, you can ask it then. There's 4 different books we're talking about. I'll go over all of them again here in just a minute, or you can link up to our authors on the website, Christopher Valentine and Dr. Christian von Lauer. And then when we come back, then let's kind of push this back even further. We've been talking about gnomes and elves and leprechauns and fairies and brownies and water sprites that are here in the United States. That begs the question, have they always been here in the United States? And was there a time when they might have come over from the old country? Why do we make a connection with certain countries with certain types of these natural people? Leprechauns with Ireland, for example. Are there leprechauns everywhere, but we just know them by the Celtic name? And all of your natural people questions coming up next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. We're talking about the books of Christopher Valentine and Christian von Lauer. These are books about the magic of gnomes and leprechauns and fairies, the natural people. They're all around us, and every time we get going, I just get 10 million questions. I can barely contain myself. I love the thought that somehow I've been missing these natural beings all my life. That I might have some in my garden right now. They'd be very cold, but we might have some that are working at the nearby, oil change place that I just brought my car into the other day. That they could be everywhere if we just open ourselves up to seeing them. And we'll talk more about how you too can see the natural people that Christian and Christopher say are all around us next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. So, Christian Von Lauer and Christopher Valentine, let's move the timeline back even on the discussion we've been having about natural people here even further. You said at some point earlier in the hour that they evolved just like we have, or we have evolved like they are. I'm not sure which one comes first, but have they always been here? And can you tell me about perhaps some famous natural people that we might have known about other than through, so-called fairy tales?
Well,
are there any historic, gnomes and leprechauns?
Let me just first start by saying that we asked them in the very beginning when we started communicating with them what they would like to be called, and we said, would you like to be called elementals or nature spirits? And they actually said nature spirits, but they went on to say that they would like to be called nature people. So that's how we refer to them in the books. And I think Christian is going to cover the beginning of your question, though.
Okay.
Nature people go back to the beginning of recorded history. There is no subject that we know more about or have more records on than the existence and the reverence of nature people in every culture in every part of the world. In America, especially with the New Age movement, we're a little centered on the Scandinavian connection and the Irish connection to leprechauns, but they actually go back further. Their own heritage takes them back first to that Scandinavian area, but also an area around Egypt, because they played a big part in early Egypt culture, and they developed things like toys for Christmas was a concept that came from them. Making spirits, how leprechauns like beer, supposedly, and
right.
Spirits. They did something with fermenting reeds, actually fermenting what was in the reeds in the water of the Nile, and they started this thing we call beer and other spirits now. They also say that there's a connection with Egyptians and Atlanteans as well. Now, earlier I mentioned that they live longer than we do. They live even before this race of mankind that we exist in now, which is an Aryan race of man. It goes back before this entire race when we were Atlantean. In the Atlantean era, everyone was Atlantean. I don't know why we speak of it as if it was one little age, but the whole world was Atlantean. And before that, there was another great age, which we call Lemurian. So they've lived through these numerous ages. So if you go back far enough, we actually get to primordial times when there was nothing of form. And so their initial job was to start bringing molecules together and atoms together. That goes way back, okay? So they eventually evolve and start taking on shape and do other things. So we tend to reference them just from our points of history, but they've been involved in everything. Now, our culture tends to believe things based on artifacts. Some of the oldest artifacts go back about 40,000 years. This is actually 40,000 BC. This would be much older than Christianity and writing, some of the modern references we use, but they're showing in art form and in paintings and in construction that they revered and worshiped nature people back then, that far back, and they even associated them with the same things that we associate them with now, which are mainly the basic elements of air, water, fire, and earth. As we move through the different ages of humanity, we consistently find artifacts that tell the same story. Even that oldest reference I mentioned shows symbology that we use now in the New Age movement to depict things like air and fire. The triangle, for example,
Right.
And the four elements and the four directions. The pictures and the architecture and the building all show these same things. And all civilizations that we uncover so as a reference, particularly in Egypt. Although we think of Egypt's older culture being related to gods like Ra, Ra actually was associated with fire. So earlier than those records we tend to reference, there was a connection with Egyptian culture to nature people. They also had Shu, which was related to air. They were the source of Geb, which became Gob, which is the king of all nature people, which most people are aware of that are into this, and he's associated with the earth, and also the Osiris, which was water. Of course, water a long time ago, the ancient wisdom meaning of water was the sky and the cosmos, and we use that to represent birth. But every culture, every dig that we find shows nature people. We find one association that's common, and that is wherever there's agriculture, there's the belief in nature spirits. I say nature spirits because a long time ago they didn't always have the personality, which allows us to call them people now. But there's always been this association. Now, although
wait, I'm gonna unpack some of that because I know that there's a lot there for you still you could go with. But
sure.
Are there, again, I'll go back to my question, are there people, nature people then, that have been historical, which if we had known what we knew now, we'd be able to say, oh, well, so-and-so was a nature person, or a natural, or however we would describe a natural person.
Let's pick a topic that's probably kind of hot and current right now, this 2012 issue.
Yeah.
Most of those people today that are raising the concern in the issue about it go back to a connection themselves to their existence as a nature person, because they influenced the people back then to develop the calendar and the astrology and the astronomy. So most of those people themselves actually have an existence that they may be able to get in touch with where they were nature people. Walt Disney, of course, has really got this down when he depicts a lot of the fairies and pixies. It's not perfect, but he has a lot of it accounted for.
Tinkerbell being a good example of what a fairy looks like?
Tinkerbell is an excellent example of what an American garden fairy looks like. They're about 2 inches tall, and when we do our workshops where we teach people how to see the fairies live during our workshops, we do have fairies come in, especially a blue fairy, which is a little bit different than the typical garden fairy, and he's a little bit taller, but they're, as Christian was saying, they are different from all the other nature people in that they have an inner glow. And really, Disney really did get it right. I think he must have some psychics on his staff even now, because the movies that are coming out are so true to what we're getting from the nature spirits directly when we channel them.
All right. Now, when you all do your, let's say you rent out a Holiday Inn, right? And you're going to get 500 people that come in to learn how to see nature people around them. Mm-hmm. You say that you actually would bring in, say, a couple to speak to the group or to appear in front of the group?
Well, what we do is we travel with all of our nature spirits that kind of are living with us on a daily basis, which are about 50, and those are the main people that talk in the book. So they're with us at every show that we go to, and we're usually in a different city every weekend. For example, we're going to be at the New Living Expo, which is the largest New Age show in April, teaching people how to see them live, where you have hundreds of people come to the show, and we will have leprechauns come in, we will have fairies come in, we will have gnomes, and the success rate of people able to see the nature spirits is usually around 90%. So it's really huge, and there's usually camera people there. I'm always hoping that someday they'll be able to capture this on television, because the fairies and the leprechauns, are, especially the blue fairies, are different than the other nature people in that they're considered sylphs. They're a little bit higher up. So they have a very bright glow when they come in. And in addition to seeing the nature spirits, we also, when you practice the techniques in the books, we also have angels that people are able to see through the same methods. We have guides come in, archangels and ascended masters, and even crossed over relatives. So these workshops really are amazing.
So we don't want to mislead you there, Ian. It's not an exhibition like that.
I get that.
We bring in a bunch of ponies and put them in a corral and everybody stares at them. It actually is a process, and it takes about 2 hours to get the people themselves that attend to see them, experience them, and to collectively all be seeing the same thing and describing the same thing. That is a process that's involved. And we have to work with energy because we actually use human energy, the energy we have around our bodies, both etheric and our astral auras, as a backdrop to bring in nature people who contrast against that backdrop. And the reason for this is the human mind can't discern the colors at first. They can only make out the outlines. It takes about 3 days of viewing before you can actually get the depth and the color. So over years, we've developed a number of techniques where you can start seeing them in an outline shape, and we can get them to move and move around, although some people will see them just fine as we do.
But we usually start out with teaching people how to see their own etheric energy, which again is the same energy that nature spirits are made of, and then we go into teaching people how to see in the astral plane, which is where we go when we cross over, and that's usually spirit. We found that people are more willing to see spirit first than they are the nature spirits. Some people are, I think I would be probably very afraid if I had never seen the nature spirit before, just pop in. And so we do all these different techniques, and at the very end, we have the nature spirits come in.
Now this is Christian again, Ian. At the New Living Expo in San Francisco, we had a fun one last year because something unusual happened. I think it was the first time that a leprechaun actually made themselves very evident. Recall that we use this technique of brightening up the aura. We get people to puff up the aura, and then we teach them how to see that, and we teach them to see spirits and other things so that the mind will accept seeing something as different as a nature person. Okay, so we have all these glowing humans, right? Because the leprechaun really wanted to be seen, and he was on someone's shoulder, he actually brought out his own aura. So we had the leprechaun's aura contrasted with the human person's aura. Then he showed himself within his own aura. So there's a lot of visual technique because our motive is to actually make it real for people. We want them to actually see and experience them. We don't want to just talk about them.
Okay, I would pay $200 to see that. How much do your seminars cost?
Well, that particular workshop, which we are doing again, I think that's the only one that's going to be free next year. So if you're going to be in the San Francisco area, come on over to that one. Okay. And if you go to our website, mistoftheoracle.com, and you click on events, you can see all the different cities and dates and which ones will be doing the workshops then. And usually some of those shows, it's just you pay the fee to come in, and then there might be a nominal fee for the workshop. And we also do it at bookstores across the country as well.
Okay. I'm just saying, that just totally...
I still need to get your credit card information.
I would give it to you. I would give it to you right now if I could see that. I think that's just fascinating. All right. So now let me back up because you guys, every time you talk, you throw somebody else into the mix. So angels, archangels, ascended masters, that got mentioned at the same time as the as the nature people. Mm-hmm. So tell me about those, because when you were talking about agents of the divine working for the formation of the world and stuff, that would have fallen into the category of angels. What's the difference then between an angel and, say, an elf?
Okay. We're speaking of a hierarchy, first of all. And nature people would be towards the bottom of the hierarchy. They would be the denser of all the other forms that we mentioned. They would be like us. We're physical, and we're trying to become spirit. So they would be the physical component, and that more spiritual form would be the angels, devas, and archangels. Now, the archangels, we don't tend to actually put them in that kingdom, although they're associated with it, because the archangels, which the Eastern philosophy is called Diane Cohen, by the way, and that's much, much older than Christianity, those old 6,000-year-old philosophies define them as being the ones that define the 7 planes of existence we live in. For example, we live in this physical plane, but there's also a plane that we go over to when we expire. When we die, we pass over to the astral plane, and it's very easy to get evidence of that plane. We do that almost every week. We bring up spirits. But there's a plane higher called the mental plane, which is where heavens are. I mean, they all have their own distinct characteristics. These different planes, an archangel was put in charge of, and that's Genesis even talks about this. They show God speaking to someone, let there be a heaven, let there be an earth or a firmament. Okay, so the archangels are the ones that are in charge. The angels and the nature people tend to take the direction from them. Angels more particularly take the direction from the archangels, and they tend to be the messengers because they're concerned with large groups of people like mankind. The nature people get involved whenever there has to be something physical going on because they're more closely associated to the physical plane. They're more dense than all the others. So they actually work on the plants and the crystals and the rocks and whatever the grand plan calls for. And, of course, everything was by design. They actually have to do the hard labor, so to speak.
Okay, but they are eternal.
No.
Okay, the elves have a shelf life, as it were.
Depends how you, we just sent them back to China.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, how long do they live?
Well,
and why do they die?
Nature spirits, I should say, not just nature people, can live up to 400,000 years old.
Okay.
And then they can also be considerably less. It doesn't mean that they don't have an eternal spirit, because they do, just as we do, because we all are connected in some way, in an evolutionary way. We were them at one time, okay? But they do reach a natural end of their existence, in which case, being diaphanous, they sort of fade away, which is how they're born, by the way. They just sort of start fading in. They don't have the density we have, so they don't need that process of being birthed the same way.
So they're not reproduced, as it were?
No,
okay.
They do not. But they do come in sets. For example, gnomes usually will come about in pairs. Sort of a split ego there, but they're not fully developed as we are, so it takes sort of two of them to accomplish the same things. The fairies, we often see them in groups of 6 to 10. Elves, we usually see in sixes.
Okay. And I was just going to add, there may be an exception to the shelf life rule, because when we were talking with the leprechauns, they were saying that they were here at the beginning of time when the earth was forming. And this kind of goes back to your earlier questions and on how long have they been here, when did they get started. And it seems that from all the discussions that we've had with them is they keep saying that they're older than time, and time is they're always referencing time. And so it seems to me that I don't really know when the leprechauns expire. And we're really starting to get more involved in that area, because the next book, which is called Mystical Powers, actually Magical Powers and Mystical Beings, that's coming out on St. Patrick's Day, is referencing the leprechauns. And the leprechauns belong to a class called the Jinn, which the blue fairies also are a part of.
No, the Jinn, this is Christian again. The Jinn, by the way, go back to Egyptian times also, and Iranian times, Pakistan. So the people can be, the leprechauns can be traced back there.
I remember them from I Dream of Jeannie.
Yeah.
But hang on a second. And we're coming up at the top of the hour, so this will have to be a quick question. And Christian or Christopher can answer. Can we kill them?
No. You cannot hurt them.
We cannot hurt them. So we don't have to worry about, if we were spraying pesticides in the garden, that you're killing off fairies.
That was one of my first biggest fears is when we talk about that in the first book is, can you accidentally knock them over or sit on them and things like that? No. The nature spirits are right here on the physical plane, so we can see them, but they're made of a lighter material called etheric matter, and that is why they're pretty much safe.
So if we caught a fairy and put her in a jar...
You wouldn't be able to catch a fairy, first of all.
Okay. They allow themselves to be caught.
All right, so they allow themselves to be caught. Do I have to poke holes in the top?
All nature people like to, if they're going to relate to you, they like to try and experience life as we do. So yes, they would like air.
Okay, all right. Just trying to get to it. This is loving I'm having a great time. So thank you. It's Christopher and Christian. We'll get back to the books about gnomes and leprechauns and elves and fairies and sprites and angels and I don't know. I don't even know where to begin coming up next hour, but it'll be great. Hang on. It's Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett.